I grew up with parents who apologized but never changed. And now I'm doing the same. I never thought I'd write something like this. I've always been the kind of person who tries to see myself as a good person. Not perfect, obviously, but someone who tries to do the right thing. Someone kind. Someone who doesn't hurt people. Or at least, that's what I thought. I'm 19 years old. And recently I realized something that I'm honestly struggling to accept. The way I grew up affected me more than I thought. And it didn't just affect me. I'm repeating it. I grew up in a home where my parents made a lot of mistakes. I'm not talking about normal parenting mistakes. I'm talking about things that really mark you when you're a child. Constant yelling, harsh punishments, emotional guilt, manipulation. But the worst part wasn't that. The worst part was what came after every argument, after every time they made me feel terrible. The same thing always happened. The apology came. They always said, sorry. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I was just stressed. It won't happen again. When you're a kid, you want to believe them. So I did, over and over again. Because when you're little, you don't have many options. Your parents are your whole world. If they tell you they love you, if they say they're sorry, you accept it. But over time, I started to notice something. The apologies never meant change. Never. It would happen again, and again, and again. It was like a cycle. They would do something wrong. They'd apologize. They'd promise to change. Everything would seem normal for a while. And then, it would happen again. When I was a child, I didn't know how to explain what I felt. But now I do. It felt like the apologies were just words, nothing more. For a long time, I told myself something. When I grow up, I'm not going to be like that. I think a lot of kids who grow up in difficult homes make that silent promise. You tell yourself you're going to be different, kinder, more aware, more fair. And honestly, I thought I was succeeding. I always tried to be a good friend. I'm the kind of person who listens when someone has problems, the one who tries to support others, the one who says things like, hey, I'm here if you need to talk. And for a long time, I thought that meant I was okay, that I had moved on from my childhood, that it hadn't affected me that much. But a few months ago, something strange started happening. I began to notice a pattern, an uncomfortable conversation with a friend, then another, and they always ended the same way. The other person upset, me apologizing. At the time, I thought that was normal. Everyone makes mistakes, right? But then I lost a friend. Not a temporary fight, not an argument. A friend who simply decided to walk away from me. And when I tried to fix it, they told me something that still echoes in my head. They said, you always apologize, but you never change. When I heard that, it felt like someone had punched me in the stomach, because suddenly, something clicked in my mind. That was exactly what my parents used to do. After that conversation, I started thinking a lot. Probably too much. I went over many of my interactions with friends over the past few years. And it was uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. Because I started noticing things I had ignored before. Small passive-aggressive comments. Moments when I overreacted. Situations where I knew I was hurting someone, but kept going anyway. After realizing the pattern, I thought things would automatically change. Because now I knew. I was aware. But it turns out that being aware doesn't mean your brain suddenly stops doing what it has always done. There were moments when I could literally feel it happening. A conversation with a friend would start normally, everything fine, and then something small would bother me. A comment, a tone, something that maybe wasn't even an attack but that my brain interpreted as one. And in that moment I had two options. I could let it go, or I could respond. And many times I responded, not always directly. Sometimes it was sarcasm, sometimes a passive-aggressive comment, sometimes just a cold attitude. And the worst part is that, while I was doing it, a part of my mind knew exactly what was happening. It was like watching a crash in slow motion. I knew I was being unfair. I knew the other person didn't deserve that. I knew it would end in an argument, but still, I didn't stop. It's hard to explain. It's like there's an automatic version of me that takes control. And when I finally calmed down, the familiar part came. The apology. Always the apology. I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. I was upset. It won't happen again. And in that moment, I meant it. I really wanted to change. But wanting to change and actually changing are two completely different things. And that's something I'm just starting to understand. The friend I mentioned before, let's call him Alex. I met Alex about 2 years ago. It was one of those friendships that form quickly. We talked a lot, shared memes, played video games, told each other personal things. Alex was a pretty patient person, and now I realize he was probably too patient with me. There were small arguments during our friendship, sometimes over silly things, but many times they started because I reacted badly to something. One day Alex said something that annoyed me at the time. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember how I reacted. Sarcasm, then harsher comments, and eventually the conversation turned into a fight, nothing new. But this time Alex didn't respond like usual. Normally we tried to fix things quickly. This time, no. A few hours passed with no messages, then a day, then 2. So I did what I always did. I texted him. I apologized. A long message explaining that I had reacted badly, that I was stressed, that I didn't mean to make him feel bad. You know, the classic apology message. But this time Alex replied with something different. Something I honestly think I needed to hear. He said, I know you're not a bad person, but this keeps happening. Then he wrote, you always apologize, but nothing ever changes. I replied saying that this time I really would change, because that's what I always said. But Alex didn't argue. He didn't yell. He didn't insult me. He was just honest. He said something like, I think you're aware of what you do, and that makes it worse. That hurt quite a bit, but he was right. Because many times I did know I was being unfair. I just didn't stop, Alex continued, saying something that stayed with me for days. He said, I don't think you do it because you're cruel. I think you do it because you're used to it. And when I read that, it was like someone turned on a light in a dark room. Used to it. That was exactly what it was. I had grown up in an environment where conflict, apologies, and repetition were normal. It was the only relationship model I knew. I wasn't doing it intentionally, but that didn't make it any less harmful. The conversation ended in a pretty calm way. Alex told me he needed distance, that he hoped I would really work on my issues. But that for now, he preferred to step away. And honestly, I understand. Losing a friend isn't always dramatic. Sometimes there's no big final fight. Sometimes they just disappear from your life. No more messages, no more memes, no more late-night conversations. And in the silence is when you start thinking. A lot. Too much. I started remembering many interactions with different friends, moments where I reacted badly, moments where someone tried to tell me something was bothering them, moments where I promised to do better, and then I didn't. That's when the shame started to appear, because one thing is making mistakes, another is making the same mistake many times. And that's when I thought something pretty sad. Maybe the best thing for me was just not to have friends for a while. Not because I hate people, but because I don't want to keep hurting people who don't deserve it. If I still don't know how to break this pattern, maybe the most responsible thing is not to drag others along while I try to figure it out. There's something very strange about self-awareness. People often say that being aware of your flaws is the first step, and I guess that's true. But no one talks about how humiliating it can feel. Because when you're aware, you can't hide behind excuses anymore. You can't say you didn't know. You can't pretend it was all an accident. You have to accept that, in some stories, you're not the victim. You're the problem. And that hits the ego hard. For years, I thought I was pretty mature. I thought I understood my emotions. I thought I was growing as a person. But now I realize something. Maybe I was just good at justifying myself. That's hard to admit. But I guess it's part of the process. I don't have a magic solution. Wish I did. Therapy would probably help a lot, but right now I don't have the resources for that. And my parents, well, let's just say they're not the kind of people I can easily have that conversation with. So for now, I'm trying to do something simpler. Observe myself. When I feel like I'm about to react badly, I try to stop. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But at least now I try. I'm also trying to accept something important. That changing a pattern you've learned your whole life probably isn't going to happen in a week. Or in a month. It might take years. But I think recognizing the problem is at least a start. And if Alex ever happens to read something like this, I just hope he knows he was right. And that losing that friendship was probably the wake-up call I needed. And then came the usual. The apology. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. It was a mistake. But if I'm completely honest, a lot of the time, I did know what I was doing. And I did it anyway. That's the hardest part to admit. It wasn't ignorance. It was a habit, a pattern, one I had learned my whole life. Because in my house, apologizing was enough. No one really expected change. Apologies were like a reset button. Everything would start over, until the next time. And the worst part is that now I realize I was doing exactly the same thing with my friends. I think the most painful part of all this isn't realizing that I have issues. It's realizing that, in some situations, I was the problem. For a long time, I saw myself as someone who had been hurt by their childhood. The victim. But now I have to accept something much more uncomfortable. Sometimes, I'm also the villain in other people's stories. That's hard to say, but it's true. I've had friends who were patient with me, who tried to talk to me about things that bothered them, who gave me chances to improve, and I didn't change. Not really. I said I would. I promised. But in the end, the pattern came back. And every time someone walked away from me, I told myself they just didn't understand me. Now I can't keep telling myself that anymore, because now I see what's happening. I'm repeating the exact same cycle I grew up in.